Hey everybody, welcome to TruBlu Today. I'm your host, Bob France. On today's episode, we go deep inside the sometimes corrupt justice system and inside documentary filmmaking all at the same time. You may think you know the story of white boy Rech, but you don't know the whole story unless you've watched White Boy here on TruBlu or on Netflix. A teenage kid recruited and used by the FBI, then kicked to the curb when he was no longer valuable to them. That's part of the story of White Boy. And today you'll hear from the director of the documentary, who also happens to be the CEO of TruBlu. Later, on The Point today, we'll talk about the controversial issue of police chases, with a couple of high-profile incidents in California involving innocent people being killed and injured in high-speed pursuits. The question of whether or not to chase fleeing suspects is being asked yet again. We'll also feature another one of Chris Hansen's takedowns. Today, you'll get a sneak preview of the newest takedown, Social Media Monster. And on the case today, we'll explain how a bunch of teachers in New York who decided to take their health care into their own hands ended up in the crosshairs of the FBI and New York state law enforcement. We'll, of course, check on the inbox to see what comments and questions you have about TruBlu today, and we will pay respect to and recognize a few more of our fallen heroes. It's all coming up on TruBlu Today. Now, let's get started. We're joined now by the director of one of the most amazing documentaries you are going to see.
The only connection I have to the free world is this telephone.
It's one of the many documentaries in a huge library on the TruBlu streaming, factual streaming network. And we're talking about the owner, the boss, the co-founder and the president of TruBlu Factual Streaming Network, Shawn Rech. Shawn, welcome to your program.
Thanks, I appreciate it, Bob.
White Boy is one of the most fascinating documentaries I've ever seen. Obviously, all documentaries aim to get a lot of true information, but the depth to which you and your team went to tell the true story of Rech Jr., who did more time than anybody, I think, in the history of the state of Michigan for being a juvenile committing a nonviolent crime. It's remarkable. Now, most people know who White Boy Rech is. They know him as White Boy Rech. They know the story because it has been part of the mythology and the legend, really, of Detroit and national crime circles for a very long time. Tell me why you needed to tell this story, and tell me why this was so important to you.
Because he was languishing in prison. And, a lot of good people worked for decades to try and free Rech. And we just helped secure the release of L. Story Simon in Chicago, which is featured in our movie A Murder in the Park. So we were emboldened that, well, maybe we can apply some kind of pressure and do it again. There's a saying that when you shine a light, the cockroaches scatter. And I think when they knew a light was coming, and we didn't know it was going to end up on Netflix and everything, when we first made the movie. But when they knew the light was coming and they knew what we had, some of the people that opposed Rech parole came out and said they would no longer oppose that parole. So we like to think we had a little bit to do with his story and with him having the outcome that he had. A lot of people worked a long time, including some of the FBI agents who worked him. They felt riddled with guilt. So that's why those folks participated in the film, too.
We'll get into some of the specifics of that as we go on here, but I'm interested in the comparison to Al Story Simon and A Murder in the Park, because the difference here, of course, is Al Story Simon was an innocent man in prison. Rech Jr. was technically in prison for something he should have been in prison for, just not nearly as long as he was. He did traffic in drugs, and we'll talk about the details of the story and everything, how he was brought into, working for the FBI. But is there any difference there, I guess, in the two stories in your reason, considering one guy we had to get him out. He was innocent. This guy was guilty, but he was just being railroaded into serving a much longer term than he should have.
Well, Al Story Simon in A Murder in the Park was a wrongfully convicted man. Richard Wershey Jr. was grossly over-sentenced. In some states, he would not even have been charged as an adult. In my eyes, he was a political prisoner, and I couldn't believe that something that horrible happened in this country, and I wanted to do my small part and our team to do our small part in trying to secure his freedom.
These are passion projects for you, aren't they?
Well, I'm not going to lie to you. We do this to make money, but we try and pick projects we can feel awfully good about too. The thing with Richard Wershey is I knew his story as a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid in Cleveland. You know, in Cleveland, we have more affinity with Detroit here in Cleveland than we do with Cincinnati. There's no doubt about that. So, you know, Cleveland's very similar to Detroit, and we knew that story. And so I had already heard of him, you know, as a kid, and I heard the legend.
You've heard of him and had heard of him. Did you hear about the depth of the corruption in the city of Detroit, starting with the mayor's office, working all the way through some of the police department, working all the way through some of the detectives? Because that, of course, is the real story here behind what happened to white boy Rech Wershey Jr.
This doesn't have anything to do with the movie White Boy, but I first learned about corruption in Detroit when I learned that the Detroit Institute of Art was going to have to sell all of its precious artwork to pay for the retirement plans, the exorbitant retirement plans that the politicians agreed to years ago to get the union vote, throwing away the lives of everybody today by putting these chains on them, these financial chains of these unpayable pensions that they used to buy votes in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So that's when I first learned how messed up Detroit was. Then, you know, I didn't know the true Richard Wershey story. I thought, you know, in my little semi-racist suburb, okay, back in 1981, heard that this white kid was so smart he was running all the black gangs. Total BS, okay? But we believed that. We probably wanted to believe that, okay? But he wasn't running all those black gangs, you know, and you learn that in the movie, that this was a caricature.
And this is a difficult thing to discuss because we don't want to give away too much of what's in the movie. You have to watch this. People absolutely are going to be blown away when they find out some of the specifics about this and how Richard Wershey Jr. got drawn into the lifestyle to even be in a position to be accused of running drug deals and running these gangs. He was recruited, and you can say as little or as much as you want about this. Again, I want people to watch it, but he was recruited by the FBI to serve as an informant, to actually work his way into these things, and nobody heard that at his trial, which is a big part of this thing, at his first and only parole hearing for the first, 18, 19 years of his sentence. And that part of this is something I didn't know. I had heard similar to you about this white kid running black gangs, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know about this part of it until I watched the movie.
Mm-hmm. I don't mind. It's a bomb we dropped during the movie, but it's out there. I mean, I think it's in the metadata for the movie in the description.
Okay.
So Richard Wershey Jr.'s father was a federal informant. He was an arms dealer, and he would sell guns and then sell the information who bought the guns to the feds. And they lived very close to Johnny Curry, who ran the Curry Boys along with his twin brother. And they thought, due to the proximity, maybe Rick Sr. would know something about the Curry Boys, and they try and get some information. Rick Jr. was with him at McDonald's meeting with an agent, and they asked Rick Sr. about the Currys. He said, I don't know a thing about them. And Rick Jr. spoke up and said, I know all about them. And that's when he started getting involved, and that's when his father started making money off of the information he was giving, hopefully sharing some of it with Rick. But Rick was just an eager 14, 15-year-old who wanted to please his dad and, probably enjoyed the attention of these people being glued to what he was saying. And he was
they abused him. They abused him.
Absolutely
I mean, literally.
abused him.
I mean, learning about what they told him when he said, I do have school tomorrow morning. I do have to go to class. Do I really have to do this midnight or 2 a.m. or whatever?
I mean, they weren't saying, quit school, but they were saying,
we need you to do this. And I'd say, well, I got school tomorrow. And they said, so what? We still, go down to this club for us.
And they said, yeah, we really need you to do this. They didn't care if he got an education. They didn't
Right.
care what happened to him.
They don't argue that happened. They just argue about who did it. The FBI agents will say that it was the Detroit Police Department that did that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And DPD was horribly corrupt, and they would sell a young man out. They would, to get their stats or whatever. I mean, they were also, on these raids, they were taking half the money for themselves or 3/4 of the money for themselves. So, they had a big interest in these raids because there was always cash laying around.
So they don't dispute, but again, they wouldn't allow, or the prosecutor wouldn't allow, or the judge wouldn't allow, or whatever. When again, we'll fast forward a little bit here to what happened after they used and abused Rech Wershey, and then they kicked him to the curb and said, we don't need you anymore, without even telling him that, really. And then a kid who got addicted to that lifestyle that he was doing for the, as an informant, continued on, and he did. He broke some laws.
Well, they told him to learn the drug game. Mm-hmm. They financed him in the drug game and gave him the seed money. They encouraged his continued involvement and his growth into becoming what they call a weight man, someone who dealt in kilos, not in handing $25 worth to someone on the street.
Right.
And then when somebody said, boy, we're in this too deep, they just abandoned him. Mm-hmm. What did he know how to do? Where did he have lines of credit? Where did he have customers calling him for stuff? In the dope game. They put him in the dope game. They completely made him. They were complicit. The federal government, Wayne County, the city of Detroit, should be sued. They should have to pay him like $25 million for what they did to him. And then he sits and spends 2/3 of his life in prison while his kids grow up and his grandkids are born and his mom gets old. What's the price of that?
And the others who he was helping to take down, including while he was in prison, when he was recruited to now, try to help take down some corrupt cops, maybe with the hope that they would actually reduce his sentence a little for cooperating and helping to bring down bad guys, and only got worse from there instead of better. When you talk to him, and I hear your voice in some of the off screen talking to him, what was your impression of him? What did you learn from him, or what kind of a kid he was? Because they wanted to paint him as being every bit as dangerous as the Curry Boys, or every bit as dangerous as some of the other killers. He was described as being worse than a serial killer. What was your impression of him as you got to make this film?
I just empathize with him, and I thought it was such an injustice when I talked to him. I thought the fact that someone about my age has been sitting in prison since, days that I barely remember in my life, okay, for something that he did back then that he would never have done, probably, if the government didn't send him to trade school for dope, okay? I was just consumed by the injustice of it all. The other thing is, prison can really corrupt you, and he seems to have not been corrupted as badly as some people who have had to adapt to that environment.
I was amazed as I heard him do the narration or the commentary in those portions of the film where he's talking now about what had happened to him, and I was blown away that he was as calm and he was as well-spoken and as articulate, because I expected him to have just become, a prison, a stereotypical convict in prison, where hard, made hard by the conditions and angry after what was done to him, and I was really blown away. That's the reason I asked you about your perception. Now, you did talk in the making of this film with some other people who are far, far, far more guilty and violent and, at the top of the drug game than Rech Wershey ever could have been, Rech Wershey Jr., including Johnny Curry, who admitted, I think he says at some point in the film, again, not to drop too many things here, but if I'm a 10, Rech Wershey was a 2, and yet he got very little time in prison.
Less than half
of
the time, about half the time that Rick got. And Johnny Curry ran an empire. Mm-hmm. Johnny Curry ran a very sophisticated, organized crime operation, and by FBI accounts, grossed between $250 and $300 million. Okay, Rech was caught with, I think, 30 grand in a bag. This is not quite the same when you're talking about scale and having
Right.
an army behind you.
And even he said that, which I found fascinating. You know,
Johnny
Johnny said
said
this kid should have been done 6-7 years and out. Much less than I did or should have done. In addition to kind of taking a measure of the man that Rech Wershey Jr. is, you actually had to talk to some people who were major drug dealers and even in some cases killers. How did you feel when you were talking to these individuals about the kind of lives that they led and how they intersected with Richard Wershey Jr.?
I was shocked by their candor. I interviewed someone who killed 30 people and admitted to it in open court, and I'm sitting 4 feet away from him. And I was asked if I felt scared. I didn't feel scared. I felt very, very fortunate that I was able to get an interview with that person. You know, it's hard when you're dealing with prisons and other logistics to get interviews, but I just thought that we had to show some benchmarks and give people a frame of reference because of these insane sentencing disparities that we have in the United States. There are people who have been in jail for 30 years for marijuana, and we've helped capture killers with our Crime Stoppers program in Miami who've done 7.5 years. So that's mind-blowing to me. And that's what I was just thinking like a filmmaker and thinking about the leverage and entertaining the audience, but also educating the audience and showing them, here's why 30 years for Rech Wershey is wrong.
This is the Klaus von Bülow case that I was the appellate lawyer, and you don't get too many cases where the reversal of the conviction makes the front page of the New York Times.
Attorney Alan Dershowitz has an office full of memories from the big cases: O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Patty Hearst, Jim Baker. He can't see any reason Rech Wershey should still be behind bars.
And it's entirely possible that had White Boy not been made, that time would be longer and longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, I have to be careful because there are just so many people who worked so hard for him, and their work mattered and their work helped move the needle for sure. I'd like to think, like I said, that we had a small part in it. Some would say we didn't, but
Well, Shawn, I asked you a minute ago or a few minutes ago about the passion that I think you put into these types of films like A Murder in the Park and like White Boy. And I'm kind of blown away by the compassion shown by some of the people that we're talking about here, some of the drug dealers and killers and so on and so forth. They really felt bad for this kid. Normally, these aren't people who usually feel bad for other people. When they're out for themselves, if you're willing to take lives, you're willing to deal drugs and ruin lives and so on and so forth, you don't really have too much concern for other people. But people you talk to in this film really did. They all felt like Rech Wershey was being treated unfairly.
Right. Well, the angry, sophisticated, evil drug dealer in his 20s can become after some life experience, and when they're a 59-year-old grandfather, they soften up a little bit and put things in perspective. And I think that's what changed some of them. I mean, because Rech, helped to set some of them up, and they still forgive him. They're like, it's like we were playing cops and robbers a long time ago, and everybody's okay. We're both lucky we're alive, is the way a lot of them looked at it. A lot of our friends are dead. We're alive. We made it. Let's end the insanity.
I can see why that would be. That's fascinating. And Shawn, whenever you see a story or do a story or you make a film about an injustice, one of the things I think viewers hope to see is at the end justice. In Al Story Simon's case, justice was served. He was released. In Rech Wershey's story, there's two parts to this justice, I guess. One is about Rech, but the other is about holding people accountable. The mayor of the city of Detroit, Gil Hill, Hollywood intersected with this whole thing. And the roles that these individuals played in not just his conviction, but in keeping him from getting paroled, not even allowing a judge who knew this was wrong to resentence him, those people are still regarded as heroes in the city of Detroit. And that's something that I think viewers are going to probably find maybe a little bit dissatisfying when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of people have seen this film and will see this film. It's on TruBlu. It's actually on some other AVOD streamers, and Netflix just relicensed it for 2 more years. So it's going to get millions of eyeballs, and people are going to know. We're educating them about how it works in Detroit. Detroit is every bit as corrupt as Chicago, which is pretty famous for being corrupt.
But aside from the viewers, how do you feel about that? Again, as a man who really is looking for justice, you really are taking these things on with an attempt to do some good. Like you said, yeah, it's a company, you're trying to make money, but you're trying to do some good. Justice isn't done when the people who committed the injustices, there's still the mayor's name on the Justice Center in Detroit. His name is there, and it's proud as can be. And people who have, who were a part of the story and the victimization of Rech Jr., they still are regarded and lauded in Detroit history, which is got to be a difficult thing for a person like you.
Yeah, you can't. Mayor Coleman Young was never found guilty of a crime, and he was a legendary guy, a powerful guy who probably helped a lot of people. But you can't charge someone who's passed away, and this is kind of an oral history, and it kind of writes itself. And I'm glad we added some texture to it, but I don't think one movie is going to completely change the story.
The point today is that there are no easy answers to the question of police chases through densely populated cities and roadways. But the uptick of innocent civilians being injured and killed in these chases proves that we better find an answer, and quick. Last week in Los Angeles, 2 separate police pursuits resulted in the death of an innocent driver who was not involved in the chase and the serious injury of another. PJ Media reported on both cases, the first of which was in the San Fernando Valley on February 14th, when fleeing robbery suspects plowed into a car driven by a 19-year-old student, taking his life. The driver was arrested after the crash, but that's no consolation at all for the family of the collateral damage victim of the crash. On February 16th in South LA, a man driving a stolen pickup truck led police on a high-speed chase, eventually running a red light and critically injuring a woman when he smashed into her car. According to the PJ Media report, the California Highway Patrol tracks statistics on police pursuits, and in 2020, which is the most recent year they're available, there were over 11,600 pursuits, over 2,700 of which resulted in collisions. 2% of those resulted in fatal injuries, 35% non-fatal. 12 of the 61 fatalities were suffered by innocent drivers struck in the chaos of the chases. Now, the natural reaction of this for many is to call for an end to police chases. There's nothing so important, the argument goes, to risk the lives of innocent people in order to catch fleeing suspects. And that may be true, except for when it isn't. Law enforcement experts all agree that a policy of non-pursuit in a given community would lead to an increase in crime rates that is hard to comprehend. If police pursuit of fleeing suspects was limited in any measurable way, the message would be out to the criminal community. Always have the getaway car at the ready. Robbing a store? Get ready to roll. Assaulting a person, committing a murder, stealing a car? Hit the gas and hit the road. You're guaranteed to go free, at least for a while. And for the criminal mind, a while is enough. They'll go through whatever plans they have to avoid the cameras, offload the stolen goods, get the stolen car to a chop shop, whatever they have to do, as long as they know they can get away. If police pursuits of violent criminals are abandoned due to concerns over collateral damage deaths of other motorists, how long will it take for the public to declare the police as being ineffective and unconcerned about public safety? So the reality is that police and the public are both in lose-lose situations when suspects decide to flee. Maybe the best way to approach this difficult situation was spelled out by the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who was quoted by PJ Media in their coverage from a 2007 opinion. The Constitution assuredly does not impose an invitation to impunity earned by recklessness. He's right, of course. Still, the idea of innocent people dying in high-speed chases, no matter how justified and noble the pursuit might be, it's a difficult concept to accept. So let's put the question to you. Hit us up in the comment section on the TruBlu app or on our YouTube channel, wherever you can find us, and answer this question. Should police continue high-speed chases in high-traffic areas of our cities and highways? We'll share your comments on a future episode of TruBlu today. And that's the point. Okay, it's time for another takedown preview with our good friend Chris Hansen. Now, oftentimes, the takedowns that we have to show you are kind of funny, only because the criminals or the alleged criminals that we watch are some very interesting characters. This one is not funny because, as you'll see, this one doesn't involve a decoy. This one involves an actual victim. Let's watch very carefully Social Media Monster.
Peter Pejic flew from Florida to Detroit, Michigan, where surveillance footage captured him in the early morning hours.
He convinced her that he would fly up and he would meet her at a parking lot, at a church parking lot, at midnight. He had already gone to a hotel, which is in the area off of Pearson 75, rented the room. We knew what time that was. We have the surveillance videos. Then he came back, picked her up, took her back to the hotel. We have him walking down the hallway. She's a little tiny 12-year-old girl. 12-year-old. Gets her in the room, and he's with her for 4 hours. And full sex, oral sex. He's videoing the whole thing, and he's teaching her, told her what he wanted her to wear, how he wanted her to do her hair, grooming. And after that interaction of 4 hours, he was in Michigan for 48 hours. I can only account for 4. That little girl had a psychological breakdown, and her parents took her to the hospital, and it was at that moment that the SANE nurses, which are sexual assault forensic nurses, recognized not only physiological trauma from a grown man to a 12-year-old girl, but the emotional breakdown, and that's what opened the door.
The clock was ticking to catch this volatile child predator before he could claim another victim. So how did the Genesee County Sheriff's Office track Pejic down? Detectives Walker and Kennemer documented their journey as they partnered with Florida law enforcement.
So this is the very latest takedown by Chris Hansen and his law enforcement teammates. I don't know how it's going to turn out yet either, so you're going to want to watch this. Social Media Monster, the next and most recent takedown. And by all means, after you watch it, leave your comments, ask your questions, give us your analyses on the comment section on TruBlu. Today, we're on the case of New York City teachers being flagged and reported to the FBI because they were unvaccinated. According to an affidavit filed in federal court, an unknown number of teachers who chose not to take city-mandated shots in order to keep their jobs saw their situations considerably worsened after the mandate was lifted. The case of New Yorkers for Religious Liberty versus the City of New York revealed, by way of the attorney representing the teachers, that flagged teachers were labeled with problem codes that impact their ability to get another job. The allegations, outlined by the Defender Children's Health Defense, were based on an affidavit written last year detailing how the New York City Department of Education flagged the unvaccinated teachers without any evidence of misconduct and sent their information and their fingerprints to the FBI and to the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. Now, according to the affidavit, the Department of Education assigns problem codes to the personnel files of employees that, quote, should not be hired due to unexplained misconduct of some kind. When the DOE puts a problem code in an employee's file, it also places a flag on the employee's fingerprints, which are then sent to the national databases at both the FBI and the State Division of Criminal Justice Services. The affidavit also included an email from a Department of Education official confirming that a problem code was added to the personnel files of DOE employees who were placed on leave without pay for failing to be vaccinated in violation of the mandate. The flag then adversely impacted the employment prospects of teachers when they sought jobs outside of New York City. Attorneys for the city did not even deny the veracity of any of these allegations in court. So in other words, teachers who made a personal choice, possibly a religious one, to choose their own manner of health care are allegedly being treated as criminals by the city and the state of New York. State and federal law enforcement now has files and fingerprints of these innocent U.S. citizens who simply chose not to inject themselves with an unknown substance with unknown side effects. Better stated by an official with the Children's Health Defense Organization, by sending biometric data about unvaccinated teachers to the FBI, New York City educators were being set up to be viewed as extremists or even terrorists. Educators who declined COVID vaccination, including myself, had every right to do so, he wrote. No one is a terrorist or an extremist for holding the line on what does and does not go inside of their bodies, especially injected directly into their muscle tissue. This is an example of the criminal justice system gone wrong. The only criminals, in my opinion, are the government officials who do not recognize the First Amendment protection of religious freedom when issuing wide-ranging mandates, and the city and state of New York who sought to punish these free-thinking educators by stopping them from getting other teaching jobs and having them treated as potential criminals by state and federal law enforcement. This story isn't over, and until it is, we will remain on the case. All right, it's time to check the inbox, see what you have to say. Remember, questions and comments about all of the content on TruBlu Today and on TruBlu period are welcome in all of the comment sections you can find. On our YouTube video, which is a portion of The Point from a previous show about an alleged predator who had a ton of child porn on his phone, Mary Jane 2276 writes, "Thank you for calling BS on demand creators and users, claiming to be innocent bystanders." That is exactly right. That was a big point of The Point. That was something that's very important to maintain. Understand that the demand, or rather the supply of child pornography, is only as strong as the demand. And when you've got people out there willing to pay for it, to download it, to share it, well, they're going to grab more and more kids and subject them to this. So that is exactly what this is all about, and it's why we have to stand fast. Next, from the TruBlu comment page about Dark Web John, one of Chris Hansen's more interesting takedowns. John Sayani writes, "If you ever need a subject or example for a project in psychology class on what a narcissist looks like, save this video. You will definitely get an A+. You know, I think there is a little bit of narcissism, a little bit of almost I am good enough that I won't get caught, a little bit of I'm bulletproof. I know there are stings out there. I know Chris Hansen is out there, always looking to take somebody down. But I'm smart enough to get away with it. I can sniff it out. I can smell it out." I think there's a little bit of narcissism in a lot of these, but I agree with you on Dark Web John. Okay, also on the TruBlu comment page, next we have Corey Arnold who writes this. "Why should I believe it's your first time? I mean, there has to be a first time at some point, and getting caught implies less experience, so it's kind of believable. Chris thinks he's getting them with that question for 18 years, but really it sounds like he's implying they've gotten away with the crime many times in the past. Question doesn't imply much faith in law enforcement." Well, I've got news for you. Yeah, Chris is implying that because it's probably true. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a DUI? And this isn't just to Corey, to anybody. If you ever had a DUI, was it on the very, very first time you ever drove drunk, drove tipsy, drove just a little bit over the limit? Think about all the people you know who have been popped. Most people who get caught with a DUI have driven dozens and dozens of times while drunk in the past. And guess what? Most people with predatory behavior and a predatory mindset like this, these alleged predators we're talking about, they are constantly looking for victims. In fact, it would be probably a shocker if Chris ever took down on camera anybody who was actually doing it for the first time. Predators have a behavior and a consistency to them that forces them, compels them almost to continue to do this thing. So the idea that this is not a good gotcha question, I think is crazy, because almost all of these people, I would suspect, probably all of them, are indeed doing this with some sort of frequency. And one more from the same takedown. Marcus says, "So crazy, he's entertaining." And you know what? That's kind of one of the reasons we include this on TruBlu Today, a little preview, because some of them are kind of funny. But at the end of the day, while they're funny and entertaining because of their own ineptitude or their own attitudes or whatever the case might be, it's not funny when you consider what they were actually trying to do. These alleged predators, again, they're all innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But all the people that Chris takes down are there to do a very, very heinous thing, a very, very criminal act. Statutory rape of a teenage person, not something that we like to laugh at. But we do agree. These are very entertaining, especially when the end result is them getting arrested. All right, we're winding down this episode of TruBlu Today. We really appreciate you being here, but you know we will not leave without paying our respects to and recognizing a few of our fallen heroes. Today, we recognize Lieutenant John David J.D. Anderson, Spokane Police Department, Washington. End of watch, Friday, July 5th, 2019. Lieutenant Anderson died from complications following numerous surgeries to treat serious injuries sustained from an assault in 1997. Deputy Sheriff Juan Miguel Ruiz, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, Arizona. End of watch, Monday, October 11th, 2021. Deputy Sheriff Ruiz succumbed to injuries sustained 2 days earlier when he was assaulted by a prisoner. Hey, thanks for watching TruBlu today. We really appreciate it. There's a lot of content today. Great interview. We had a really important takedown, the most recent takedown with Chris Hansen, and a couple of important topics as well. And I want to know what you think about those police chases. So please find a way to comment, ask your questions, go to our YouTube page, go to our TruBlu Today page, wherever you can find us, leave your comments. We'll find the best ones and use them and respond to them on an upcoming episode of TruBlu Today. Thanks again for watching. Be well, be safe, stay free. We'll see you next time. I'm Bob France.